for thanks
Happy
for
Christmas to
respecting
you.
yourself. Yeah.
It's all right. It's all right. As you can
Sorry,
my
sorry,
car.
sorry that I'm rushing an early start. Unfortunately, things got. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to go a little earlier than expected, but I'll try and get back on again later. It's like I'm going in for early drinks and then heading away and coming back again.
Hey, not for the first time, hey?
No, yeah, this is a great idea. Absolutely fantastic idea. It's great to. I see all the guys that you've got on. It'll prove to be a fascinating chat, no doubt. Yeah. What's up with you?
Hurtling towards Christmas with.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm riding the back of a comet. Just waiting to see which asteroid I crash into. But yeah, no, it's fun. I tell you, there's some fun stuff happening. Yeah. But what about you then? So what's the? I mean, you've got lots of highlights of the year, I imagine. But I'm just wondering whether what's your 2018 highlight?
Yeah, I remember. I saw you putting that into the group just about what's that, is there a takeaway or is there a key thing, and it got me thinking. And I was, like anything, as you know, like there's a really nice network of us all who connect every so often and reach out every so often when there's a problem, when you're like, oh my God, I'm struggling with this, can you help? And it's always good to have someone on the other end of the phone who just I've experienced that before and it's horrible, and but I suppose the one thing that consistently came up through the year with all the kind of different chats and stuff was patience. For anyone, and I know the space that you're in, and I'm not in the kind of development space any longer, and I feel it can kind of have a negative effect on you if you're not in that kind of, that space where it is development of the child and of their, the roundedness of an individual, let's say, because it's such a rich space, and it's such a great proving ground for good coaching, but I suppose what I found over the last year is that idea of patience is such a premium that if you that even more so, like the kind of space that I'm in that kind of performance space, or where it's livelihoods and things are at stake, let's say. I've myself seen even more so than ever that if you want to get someone there quicker, then encourage them to be more patient. I know that's a paradox, but it's almost like slow down, you'll go faster. And I think a lot of that has kind of come out of a lot of the reflections over the year around that space of so many people feeding into this space, and a lot of the guys that you've had on, even just the one I'm actually in the middle of one of your podcasts at the moment, but the last one I was on was the guy McNeil.
Oh, Scott, yeah.
Like, there's so much stuff in that. So much stuff, but it's so much of it came back down to get away from thinking linearly for anyone's progression. And if you can do anything at all for anyone, it is be the coach that gives them time and space to figure stuff out.
Absolutely.
Be that coach, be that guy or girl who when they reflect back on their career was like, you know what? She was the coach that actually gave me the space to actually find myself, that set me free. That set me on a real, a genuine exploration of where I fit into this whole thing as an athlete. And it's funny, as I said, when you threw that into the group there the other day, I went back over, my own kind of notes, and at the end of every month, I kind of tray here on my desk. I'll get on a call with someone and I'll have notes, and I'll just chuck it into the tray, And before the next month starts, I'm going to go through those notes and be like, okay, what were the kind of takeaways? And it was amazing how many times I had, in many different ways, written the word patience down, and I'd have a patience written down in block letters with it in bold loads of different times. I've gone over it. Like on one talk, I must have written the word down on the same space 8 or 9 times because it was so drilled into the page, you know.
Yeah.
I've it written down, and you know the way as you're chatting, you might doodle again. It's underlined and it's circled, and it just came up a huge amount of time this year. A huge amount of time. Just that idea of almost be a time architect. Can you become that coach that affords the athletes that you are working with time, that when they're with you, that they feel they have time on their hands, as opposed to a lot of things I would hear from athletes is this pressure of having to get there yesterday.
Yeah. And
it kind of takes me back to that, as I said, what I said at the start, to try and encourage more patience, because you'll actually get there.
It's funny though that I think even in the developmental space, everybody's in a rush. So I've been working with a few organizations of late, and one of the things that I think has been really interesting that I've been reflecting on is how, if you want coaches to operate in this way and, you know, work in this very much more emergent, you know, kind of development at the speed at which development should happen, you know, which is we believe should be richer and deeper, then you've got to design your curriculum in the same way.
Yeah.
And that's the piece of work that hockey have done and others are doing. But you've still got quite a lot of linear curricula in place, athlete development curricula, which are basically saying, by this age, you should be here. And if you're not here, either you are defective as an individual, and therefore we will remove you from the system and bring somebody else in who matches the expected progression rate, or we make some sort of, you know, huge conclusion that the coach is somehow defective because they haven't been able to get this group of individuals up to this particular point in time. And both of those things are crazy. But you can kind of understand that when you have somebody working with a linear curriculum, trying to work in a non-linear way, that those two things are going to culturally clash all the time.
Yeah, and I was in Sheffield on Wednesday. There were 8 of us went over from the department here in CIT to the Keith Davids Skill Acquisition Symposium, because Rick done his live the day before with Duarte, and they put on a day, you know, of all the guys, and Joe Stone presented, and Martin Rothwell presented, and Ben Strafford presented, Emma Anderson presented. They had all the kind of post-grads, and then, of course, Keith and Rick and Duarte, who are not obviously post-grads, presenting work and whatever. And it was just a really cool day of people putting stuff out there for other people to say, can I just poke and prod that a little bit, if you know? But the standout lab, essentially, where there's live subjects being put through a completely new model, is Mark's work up at AIK Stockholm.
Yeah.
It's quite literally groundbreaking what they're managing to get through. And I was actually on the phone to him last night, and he was even saying again, he was like, he said, and yet we still have a lot of challenges. They are light years ahead of a lot of other sports and a lot of other countries and a lot of what they're doing in their own club. And yet he still has a lot of challenges. So that kind of makes you think, what measure of challenge are some people experiencing if a club like AIK Stockholm, who now have huge backing from a media perspective and a government perspective, and even the social constructs around their space in the community, and the parents and the coaches, and if they're still having trouble and difficulties with coaches saying, well, no, I want to do speed today, and it's going to be done in this exact way, and everyone's form and technique. What hope is there almost for others? Because like their model is incredible what they've managed to get done, and they're only at the tip of the iceberg. He'll be the first to say we're only starting. But speaking of curriculum, if you hear Mark talking about how they are rewriting the documents for their club, he said they are very particular about removing key words and phrases to take it out of there. The word product, this product of our system, it's gone. Talent, it's gone. Elite, it's gone. So that maybe there are people who are already infected by these terms, but you know what? Anyone who picks up this manual next year, well, they're not going to see any sight or sound of these words, and we've got to start somewhere. It is a living, breathing experiment, essentially. And it's brilliant to see that they've taken that leap and right across the board, how he talked about connecting the parents into this, form of life that they discuss, and that they're doing, all the work they're doing, like Martin Rothwell's work in rugby league around this space. And it's very promising in a lot of ways, because you're like, wow, this is going to be so cool to watch. But then you rock up to your own kids kind of training, and where you're just kind of joining on in as the dad, and I'm here to help. And you realize this is we're still a long way from ever getting to even having a conversation that might lead to one day something like AIK Stockholm, and that'll give you an idea how far away we are.
It's I don't know if he told you though. I was over there not long ago, and I got to be in a room with a load of people from the Swedish Sports Confederation, and Mark's two colleagues, Dennis Hortin and James Vaughan, presented some of the early findings that they've had from the research methodology that they've been using to kind of, I guess, test and track how like the kind of cultural attitudes are embedding within the players, within the coaches, within the parents. They're using this tool called SenseMaker.
Yes.
Come out a banger, and and working with the guys Al Smith and Mark Upton and John O'Byrne, who've got this social enterprise called My Fastest Mile. And I actually think it's a really interesting area, because given the limitations of some of the research methods that we often are challenged by when working in this ecological way, they're essentially using this almost like live tracking to track the lived experiences of the participants. And that's really interesting, and aligns, I think, very closely to the approach that you're trying to use. But just some of the stuff they shared around some of the kind of challenges in terms of the older people involved in the program and their experiences, and how this has clashed against their current experiences or previous experiences. It's really interesting.
It is. And he made a comment there in Sheffield on Wednesday about how sometimes it's the parent coaches, the volunteer coaches who have no coaching experience, who catch on to the constraints-led approach or this non-linear methodology quicker, because they're not coming with any bias. They're not coming with any sense of, well, it should be this way. And then all of a sudden, then when you start from scratch with them with that, he was saying just they get so excited about it that it's not regimented. It's not incredibly structured that if I don't do this, I'm actually doing something wrong. It's actually, no. Just be with them. Be at one with what's happening in front of you, and then see if you can just, manipulate it one way or the other to determine if you feel, okay, this isn't working. Will we go a little bit more here or not? No, that didn't work. A little bit back here. Great. And he said, you can see at times that the parent coaches get it quicker. And there's got to be, for me, there's something in that there's and again, it's probably because of my own experiences, how I once coached, and I remembering that very resistant and almost painful transition into how I now coach. But if I never had that, then there wouldn't have been that painful transition, but I was trying to hold on to something that I'd seen. Surely the coaching badges and all those different things that I'd done, and surely there is. I have the badge, don't I? That must stand for something, and I have the file that tells me how to do it. That must stand for something, and I can see how that tug of war is at play. and that's the trick. That's the tricky thing. But then again, like you were saying, I think we even said about it. Said it when we were chatting the last time. There's so many. There seems to be a very quickly, a very large number of people quickly coming into this space. It doesn't be, there's a lot of good people feeding into this space now. So I think we're almost closing in on that critical mass or a tipping point of where there'll be enough people to be able to have, strong conversations with someone who will come with something to say, no, that there's no evidence behind this, and it's all conjecture, and we're coming. I think there's an emerging, almost like a scene from Lord of the Rings. It's just this huge mass of people running towards something, and I think if we can just have a little have that kind of face off one day.
It's interesting because
with enough people, who revolution will be televised, as they say.
It's interesting because I was at was with Oxford Brookes the other day doing a seminar, and one of your colleagues in the world of academia, very well published, very highly regarded, described constraints-led approach as pseudoscience.
Yeah, I saw that.
So, we didn't bite, but it was interesting just to hear that, and circular arguments, I think the other phrase was used to describe it. Which I'd love to, what I'd love to do, and I think I'm gonna, here's a commitment for you for the new year. I'm going to set up a kind of intelligence squared Oxford style debate somehow between almost like, kind of two ecological practitioners or two ecological academics and two, I don't know, cog psych academics or, anti-ecological.
Yeah.
And let's kind of, do it properly, structure it so it's not just a free for all, and then, kind of have that sort of discussion in front of a live studio audience almost. I don't know if I can, even if that's physical, but I think there's got to be some room for that.
Absolutely. Well, look, and there's, there are others, like, and again, they're important. It's all important to feed the narratives, because the narrative, the more of that there's going on, the better the narrative will become. To block it, I do think sometimes it can get a little dismissive, even to the point of maybe aggressive sometimes. But again, great. Let's have what do they? It's normally a dance off. So the equivalent of the Michael Jackson down in the car park with the two what was that, Thriller, was it, or something, or Beat It?
Yeah.
Let's do it, and I'll be in the audience that night if you put that together. We might even have it like a wedding. Are you with the groom or the bride, and whichever side you go down. And
well, what I'd be keen to do is to make it work so that it was, you had the academics going at it, and then you had a sort of equivalent one, but it's practitioner led.
Yeah.
And see what people say. Rusty, you're here. How are you?
You're right.
Looking very relaxed, chilled out.
My new lifestyle.
Is this your new lifestyle?
Yeah, it's pretty cool, if I'm honest.
You just you're catching sort of towards the end because Ed's unfortunately got to dip off, but it's good to see you. And we've just been reflecting on the past year, and the way Ed's particularly talking about the way that it feels like there's more and more people coming into the coaching space wanting to have a really decent dialogue about coaching approaches that are not what we would call traditional, linear, structured, ordered, all those sorts of things. It feels like there's a real kind of movement. I don't know whether you've picked up on the same vibe.
Maybe that's just our world. Maybe that's our biases.
We're in an echo chamber, aren't we?
A vacuum. I have a confession here, Rusty. We've never met, but I'd know all about you. And just to let you know, I have the cards, the Magic Academy cards on my Santa list.
Wow, well, that'll be good Christmas.
So yeah, so thanks, because I was struggling. What am I what can I ask Santa at 45 years of age? And I haven't that and the Non-Perfect Dad book. In fact, they're my two stocking fillers this year. So.
Non-Perfect Dad book, here it is.
Yeah.
There it is.
So that's on its way to me. I've sent my letter was posted there to the North Pole the other day. So thanks.
Yeah, well, good. Yeah, well, I'm enjoying lots of the stuff you're doing. We're coming over to Ireland actually at some stage in
Great.
In the new year. We've been speaking to a couple of people, Martin McKeeran, who used to be at Newcastle Falcons, and Budge Pountney about coming over. So.
Okay, great. Well, get in touch, please.
I guess in answer to your question, Stuart, more people I think more people have had their world kind of perturbed a little bit, so they're thinking, is coaching this?
Right.
So I'm definitely getting more people asking questions. Now, whether or not they want to listen to what I say, I don't know. But I'm definitely getting more people that are curious. And that's great. It's also quite scary for some of them. So I was in Holland last night, and when you actually start to talk about the fact you've got 30 kids and, you know, we're shaping each other's brains, and that's quite a big responsibility. And you don't know, you know, there's a new kid at the session in Holland last night, and, you know, it's his first ever session, and no one knows his background or where he's from, or, you know, then suddenly coaching sounds quite complicated. I guess maybe just be quite nice to people, and it's a reasonable start.
That sounds so difficult, though.
To be nice to people. So yeah, I'm enjoying the fact that more people are curious. I mean, before that, we just kind of got on with it, didn't we? And just accepted that whatever we were told was whatever we were told. I think it's exciting. There's lots of information out there, and lots of the thing that, I mean, the most powerful thing I've seen with social media is someone like Dave Lottie this year. So Dave posts on Twitter, you know, any chance of coming into other people's environments, and he gets 35 invites in 24 hours. So he's in football teams, so that's the bit I think that's changed, is that more and more people are going, we can go and hang out together, and we don't have to be from the same sport. We don't have to be coaching under 14s. Actually, I could learn some stuff in other spaces. So I think for me, that's the stuff that's exciting. And it's exciting that people are now driving it. So I think lots of NGBs, and I know how much you love NGBs, Stuart, lots of NGBs need to just be more comfortable with the fact that they don't have to be organising it.
Yeah. I think again, back to another one of your podcasts, it was with David Hinchcliffe, was it?
Yeah.
And he's talking about just even how if you just question things long enough, even how they use video, well, you're going to uncover better ways of kind of doing things, you know.
Nick Levette's just arrived. Welcome, Nick.
It was the first thought of seeing Rusty spread out. It made me feel slightly erotic and turned on at that moment. It was a really strong start.
See, weirdly, I had the reverse response to that.
Nick's able to as he was doing his hair.
No, we're just in big reflection mode, Nick, talking about it feels like there's a growing interest, curiosity, desire to find out more, learn more, see more different things, explore in different spaces, come outside of the sport bubble, go into a different sport bubble. Off the back of your conference in Ireland, one of the attendees who found himself sat between myself and Mark O'Sullivan, he sort of looked either side and went, what am I doing here? Guy called David Starkey, he's based down in Henley.
Yeah.
He's a great guy. He followed up and came up and watched me coach my under 12s. I don't know what he learned from it, but he got right involved, got stuck in. I was experimenting with a new game that night. And, you know, and we sort of just worked it through and had a chat afterwards. And he sent me through some notes and his reflections and sort of what he observed. And I'm like, really? You observed all that? But yeah, it was great.
That is great. That is great. And a bit like that, the fallout, in one sense, or the aftermath of that event was just how it impacted on our local area. The amount of guys just kind of locally that you're almost not even aware of that are kind of coming out of the woodwork saying, I've been trying to work in this space. It was great to actually go and see that many people there who are actually all trying to do the same thing, all with the same problems. And it's been like that. It just as I said to you, I think for some of the guys come on, there's plenty of people out there who are trying to just get outside their comfort zone. And they can do that even more so when they realize that there's other people who are happy to get outside their comfort zone.
Mm. So Rusty, we haven't really got onto yours. Did you actually have a little bit of did you get a chance to have a bit of a think about what your kind of key learning or takeaway? It's been quite a tumultuous year, a year of transformation for you, moving from one sport to another and moving into the whole, you know, the academy with Fletch. You're obviously on your grand tour. I'd be interested just to get your takeaways from the year, I suppose.
I thought about two things. I thought about one, it's really exhausting working with someone who's not like you. And having to pretend. I don't think it's good for your well-being.
But you've worked for the RFU for years. You've worked with all the people who aren't like you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I did to that extent. If someone's the polar opposite of you, then
yeah,
it's not good for your well-being or your health. So I feel liberated. The second one, and this is, I randomly went to Holland. A lady from a magazine emailed me and said, would you come over? And there wasn't really a plan. I actually ended up doing a bit of coaching. But when we arrived, we went to an artist's studio. This guy is an internet entrepreneur who's now decided he wants to be an artist. And we sat around what was essentially a kids' tea party table with drinks ranging from champagne to Yakult, food ranging from carpaccio to peanut butter, and with no plan other than just to debate around some questions. So one of the questions was, winning and losing is for games, not for conflict. And then another one was talk about how the word accountability makes you feel. And so we just had this really, there's a guy from business, there's me, there was another rugby coach, someone from a magazine, and this artist guy. And my biggest reflection was, and I just need to spend more time doing stuff like that where there's no agenda, I'm not getting paid for action, and I'm just going on a bit of a, I just have a time to think differently about stuff.
Yeah.
I came up with one idea that I can't share, but I spoke to Fletch about it yesterday, and he's just like, why have we never, ever thought of that? And it was worth the trip just for one idea that's made a big difference to the stuff we'll do. So probably just do more of that type of stuff, if I'm honest. I do a bit of that, but very rarely where there is literally, I have no idea what's going to happen in this day. There's no agenda. There's no, probably just escape a bit more.
And that, I would say that that's one of the things that you try and do with some of the learning environments that you're trying to create for coaches. You basically go, you do try and deliberately keep the space open for lots and lots of different routes for the discussion to go down. There's some similarities there, is there not?
Yeah, but I'm doing the organising there. Probably need to, and also just probably to put more time aside for myself, because it can be quite tiring, coaching and supporting other people and all that type of stuff. So yeah, it was just quite nice to escape, really.
Ed, I also thought that about the conference that you guys ran. I mean, I know there was an element of a flow and there was a bit of an agenda, because obviously we needed to try and keep people on some kind of a journey, and we couldn't make it. But what was brilliant was the space in between where the dialogue could happen and the conversation could happen, and keeping that pretty flowing and loose, and how valuable that was.
Yeah, it's an interesting point because Ollie, Phil, Alan, and myself got on a call yesterday just to kind of start the early chats about the next one. We're that difficult second album, as they call it. We're going to do every second year to give a little bit of time between each one. So we're kind of looking again, probably maybe the same month in 2020, April 2020. But the one thing that we were saying is that the interaction is what was really critical, but to kind of go to Rusty's point about just that no plan element, as I know you're aware of, Stu, like the venue changed literally the day before. We had organized and planned for a completely different type of venue, which eventually just became the tea and coffee room, and we moved into the other space, and it was your classic kind of needing to be adaptable because everything got completely thrown in the air about 36 hours before the first people arrived to register. And it actually was the making of it, because I don't think there would have been the same interaction between people if we had stayed in the other space. And also as a result of the bedlam, the chaos of having to change everything, it totally got us in a much better headspace. It almost relaxed us, the fact that we were kind of, what? Oh my, we're never going to get this ready, and there's too much. And it actually was the right headspace for us to be in, as opposed to, we're all perfectly organized, this is going to go swimmingly well, and we're ready a whole day in advance of anyone arriving. And of course, when you plan anything to that extent, well, you probably overthought it, and you're actually not ready for something to emerge organically or anything else. And a lot of what you experienced, Stu, and the others there was things that just happened as a result of a major change 36 hours out from people arriving. And as you said, probably the most significant feedback we got was there was just a huge amount of interaction between people. The talks, the presentations, of course, you make sure you stack that well for if you're putting on an event, but it's all the other stuff around it when it's just free flowing and freestyling. Even the way Phil organized the poster stuff, we couldn't believe the kind of feedback we got about that, because it was almost like an open mic session. We had not planned for that. We had not planned for that. We were going, because we'd never organized something like this as a group before. So we'd all been just going on our own experiences at conferences where we were either delegates or presenters. And we'd never seen it like the way that Phil had come up with. And it turned out to be one of the most commented things in our feedback. Just the interaction around posters was just a really, relaxed and chilled out kind of way of doing it. But people came away with, I actually got what that poster was, as opposed to the norm that you experience. So not a lot of that was planned, and yet it kind of was planned, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole thing there that it relates, I think, to a little bit around coaching and any or the design of any learning environment, which is, if it's overly planned, overly structured, what you're going to lose then is the opportunity for exploration, creativity, and novelty, and things to take place there that you would not there to expect. Now, that's not to say that there can't be any planning. We need some idea or some structure, or actually you can be on a continuum, can't you? Because actually, if you're going in there, you hear about these ideas of like unconferences, which are completely self-directed, completely led by the group in terms of the conversation on the day. Nick and I actually attended one run by the guys at My Fastest Mile, and it was disconcerting, because sometimes you can go into that scenario, you've traveled miles and you're not going to get what you wanted to get out of it. So it can be a bit of a challenge. So you need a bit of a balance, but it's where you place that balance in the design of that learning space that still enables that kind of discovery, exploration to take place.
Are you saying it depends, Stuart? Is that what you're saying?
Saying again? Well,
I'm saying it depends.
He's definitely
I'm
not
not-
saying that.
I'm definitely not saying it depends. I'm definitely saying that it's just nuanced. Should we say that?
I think it's a bit like a conference is like a meeting. We have lots of expectations around tradition and what it looks like. And so, why do people have to be sat down in a meeting? Why does it have to be an agenda? Why does it have to last exactly an hour? Why isn't it based around questions? Why do all the people have to be in the same room for the meeting? You know, lots of stuff around conferences that would freak out a lot of people. But I like it. I mean, if you're going to start talking about, you know, a world that's non-linear, how are you going to talk about it in a linear conference? That'll be my question.
Well, even on that, let's say you go back to, I got a phone. Nick Winkelman opened our conference. He's the head of athletic science and performance for the IRFU, and he called me. I don't know, it was 35 minutes before the conference. He was like, "Ed, I'm about an hour out from you. There's crazy traffic. There's been an accident," and I was like, "Okay." There's nothing you can, you know. And we said, "Okay, well, look, do what you can. We might just move something." And you kind of turned to the guys and said, "Yeah, Nick's going to be a little late." And again, and if any of you know Nick, that's the last thing you would have that you'd expect from him. He's so organized. He's incredibly professional. And so I was like, so look, we didn't expect, you certainly didn't expect this kind of thing. So we're saying, look, well, we might just move this around maybe then. And I don't know. And all of a sudden, about, I'd say 90 seconds before we were about to say, okay, we're actually going to change things around, Nick comes through the door. Now, I don't know how he covered an hour's worth of driving in 30 odd minutes. And it changed, even he said himself, it changed even the energy from him, because he was wired for his discussion then, like, and his practical, you know. And it was incredible, and it was a brilliant way to open it. And maybe that wouldn't have been as energized if he didn't drive like Lewis Hamilton down from Dublin to Cork and using roundabouts, the chicanes and the like, you know.
He kept to the speed limit though, didn't he, Ed? He didn't break the speed limit at any stage.
No, not at all. And in fact, when he called me on the telephone, he pulled in at that time. He pulled in, yeah. It was at a rest stop, in fact. And Stu, I just seen the time. I'm gonna have to go, and I'll see if I can get back on later on. Okay, when I'm wrapped up here.
No worries. Cheers, Ed.
Good to see you guys.
Have a good one. Have a good break if we don't chat to you later.
Bye.
So, Nick, you've had a tumultuous year. You must have plenty of takeaways.
No comment.
You signed a non-disclosure, did you?
No, well, the beauty of it is that I didn't. Because as they were opening the door for me, they weren't in a position to make me do anything. But no, I have kept counsel on many views.
Having said that, I can imagine there are some interesting reflections. You don't necessarily have to go into detail, but I imagine you've got some interesting reflections on this year.
Yeah, I guess, you know, comparing organisations is an interesting thing.
Okay.
And your expectations, you know, and coming from a very big bureaucratic organisation with a certain set of enforced values, not necessarily ones that the staff had decided themselves, to a place now where for the current set that we've all had input into, it even just makes you think differently about the place that you work. And I don't think one's better or worse. I just think they're different. And the values that we certainly have now are about being something. They're not just words on a bit of paper. You know, they're be empathetic and be respectful. So you, it's about a way of behaving, and it's really interesting now because the organisation, you know, we talk a lot now about great coaching being about people, and it is just about people. You know, whether you have a name of an organisation above you, where you have a certain kind of way of making decisions. You know, I reflect back now at my 14 years at the FA. The FA is a great organisation with a lot of great people in, but sometimes you get a bad person, and that becomes the challenge. And I think when I look at then a lot of sporting pathways, and I now work across a lot of different sports pathways, I think if you've got good people that all want to achieve good stuff, then amazing things can happen. But if there's one person in there that becomes the blocker, then you have a challenge. So I kind of look back and think now that, you know, if you could find your way around that blocker, and certainly when I look at different sports, if you've got great people getting into decision-making positions, then I think some pretty cool stuff can happen. And it's about making sure that we can influence systems and leaders to make sure that they put in good people into those positions. I don't necessarily know how we do that, and I think that's probably you know, more your day job role, Stuart, to kind of help influence that, I think. But the work that we do now around working with coaches, I think if you've got good people in decision-making positions, they allow you to crack on and do some pretty good stuff with the coaches, and then the coaches make the magic happen with the kids. And you just get this big spiral and snowball of some pretty great stuff going on. So yeah, it's been an interesting year with a lot going on and trying to shape what we're all about and have a really good view on what we're doing and why we're doing it and how we're doing it. You know, it's been really interesting. And then starting a project where we've probably spoken to 60 or 70 of the world's, I don't know if experts is the right word, but people with expertise, really good expertise.
Yeah, that's a better phrase, Nick. Definitely.
Yeah, speaking to 60 or 70 people of that ilk to help shape what we're doing. The outcome and the output of that kind of project will be a really strong piece of work that says, right, talent development environments, you know, these are the things that you really need to have involved in them. Puts us in a really, really good position with some of the stuff that we're doing to be able to go to sports systems, pathways, coaches, and say, look, here's what some really good thinkers in the world are saying. You should probably consider this kind of stuff. You know, and if sports then turn around and go, well, we believe in something entirely different, that's fine. You know, you crack on. I'd love to know who they're who's informing those decisions, because I don't think there'd be many experts within the world or people with expertise in the world that we haven't spoken to that are really kind of influencing systems. So that's a really rambling way of not saying very much, I think, other than the fact that it's been an interesting year, and we're probably now, in terms of my day job stuff, on the way to doing some pretty interesting work with coaches and coach developers and systems. I think
it's interesting, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts on this as well, Rusty. But I've had some really interesting experiences with leadership in my career.
What does interesting mean, Stuart? Interesting is a crap word. What does it mean? What are you really trying to say?
It means terrible. It means terrible.
I'll expand on it. Don't worry. I reckon I've been in my career, 20-odd year career. I reckon I can count on one hand how many people I can say were really good leaders. And one of the things I've noticed is that for some reason, organizations, I believe, have a perception of a good leader that is the absolute opposite of a good leader in the eyes of the person being led. Sorry, mate, go on.
What do you think their perceptions are? Give me the top 5 things those organisations think good leadership is.
Okay. Strong, clear-minded, and very, very, very clear idea of what they want to achieve. Very procedural, very clear on procedure and process and structure. They are what's the other word I was looking for? Have quite powerful personalities, forceful personalities that are alluring, I guess. And then the fifth element is that they are prepared to be tough when they need to be. So they have a toughness.
I've noticed they quite like hierarchies as well.
And hierarchy, yeah, that's a good example. Yeah.
And they quite like spreadsheets and recording stuff and talking about activity rather than effectiveness, and thinking often short term rather than long term.
Yeah.
And that all the stuff like caring and love is pink and fluffy.
Yeah, all the people bit, that's all just pink and fluffy. It's about the numbers, hitting the targets, achieving the goals, whatever it is. And that's deemed to be good leadership. And I've seen it everywhere. And it's very odd.
I've now got, I reckon, a pretty clear view in my own head of. So I manage. There's a team of 6. I reckon I've got a pretty clear view of how I want to do that with those guys now. So I think we've managed to simplify it down to you want people to be empowered and crack on and do some really good stuff and think about things themselves, right? In the same way that we would do in a coaching session. So we want to give them the control. But in order to give them the control, they need the competence and clarity. So are they good enough and have the skills to be able to do what they need to do? Are they clear about what we're trying to do? So we want to kind of get to the stage now with our team about making sure, right, we're all pretty awesome about our jobs and doing our jobs. We're really clear on what we're trying to achieve. Then I can let them crack on with it. That's ultimately, as simple as it gets.
Yeah, Project Oxygen is a good thing to look at. So Project Oxygen, classic Google question, do we need managers? We do if they have some of these behaviours, characteristic skills. Number one, most important one is being a good coach. So actually, if you're responsible for, I think they said, if it's more than 6 people, then you should be spending 80% of your time helping those people get better. And my observation is that not enough people near the top think of management or leadership as supporting, helping other people to get better. So I'm very fortunate. I get to work with Nick's quick Googling Project Oxygen.
No, I'm multitasking.
Nice. And my job's now self-selecting, so I don't have to sit with a coach and pretend he wants to get better and that he wants me to be there. And so I get to work with some pretty cool people. So Birmingham and hockey and Tyler Grange and cricket, and I get to hang with lots of people that think like that. So I've become very fortunate, really. And the other thing I've been thinking a lot about is how they hire. So I'll give you an example. So Tyler Grange, who I do a bit of stuff with now, don't do interviews. I mean, interviews would have lots of tradition. Why do they have to wear a suit? Why are we interviewing them? Why doesn't either party bring photos that bring to life why they think they should, So there's lots of different ways of interviewing, and TG are doing some cool stuff with that. But NGBs just seem to do what they've always done. And, maybe just go and get someone completely independent to select the people that get interviewed. There's also a worrying trend in sport of not even advertising jobs in leadership positions, which is like, wow, so you don't want to know what's out there.
Yeah.
Do you know what? One of my we were talking about it this week. One of my proudest moments this year is one of the new members of our team, a girl called Jenny, and the interview process that we went through to recruit her. Well, I say an interview process. It wasn't really an interview process. It was getting a load of people to share some stuff, and we kind of went, right, well, this is the kind of person we're looking for. So they'd done some video stuff as part of the before we even got to the shortlisting process. They talked about how they would develop people, what their thoughts were, what the models they used were. And again, we was like, right, there's no way of doing it. You just send us to 2-3 minute video clip. We have one bloke that walked around a national stadium around the bottom and he pinned flip charts to the wall. Awesome. We've got one guy that did it as he was driving. Not so
Is it Nick
health
Woodson?
and safety conscious. But fine. We had some bloke that just chatted. There was some bloke who had it filmed and he talked about stuff like, so we're looking at creativity and different ways of doing stuff. And then when it came to the kind of the day, it was just a load of different tasks where they worked together, where they did stuff in different ways. They had to do real life coach developing of real problems, of real stuff that would happen in their jobs, not sit down and, can you tell us about a time where you've had to deal with conflict? No, can you sit down with this coach and help him get better in half hour? Because that's what's going to happen in the real world. And out of it, we've ended up with a member of staff who is pretty cool. And they're looking at, we looked at the knowledge, skills and behaviours in a real different way. But one of the best examples I've seen of that this year is a nursery looking to recruit a new member of nursery staff. And typically, they're I don't know your experiences having kids, of taking your kids to nursery, but they're all girls. What they wanted to try and do was get away from, you need a level 2 in this, or you need a BTEC in this, or you need a GCSE in this. And a lot of the kind of the words on the on what they were looking for was, do you have the skills to read a story where you're going to get interrupted 15 times in one sentence to ask something that's nothing to do with the actual story that you're reading? Do you have the patience to deal with that kind of moment? And what they did was they talked about the reality of working with 2 and 3 year old kids and just said, can you do that as a job? Do you fancy that? Not just, well, you need a level 2 in this, and and again, it was a pretty decent way of starting to look at stuff. So we did that, and it was a really cool way that I think that we've done in the end now of getting somebody that's going to be really good at helping coaches.
So advertising based on the type of on the way the role would, and actually mapping the selection process through the almost trying to mirror it against how the role would be.
Well, absolutely, because that's the kind of thing we were pointing them for, isn't it?
Who knew? Who knew that would be a good idea?
Well, I don't know, but it seems to have worked for us at the moment. And I guarantee there's no causal link between that and n=1 sample. I get that, but so far I'm on 100% hit rate.
I've sent quite a few coaches to spend time with primary school teachers, because I think they're rock stars. Because they're doing exactly what you say. Your coaching session's been interrupted. The primary school teachers are just experts at just handling chaos and just actually. Yeah, it's a good related world for coaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Peter's joined us. I don't know where he is. He's got some sort of interesting Swedish sign behind him. He's decided to take his video off, probably, I imagine. He didn't like the look of it. How are you, Peter?
I'm good, thank you. But I'm even better without video, actually.
I was going to ask you where you were.
Yeah, well, I'm in dark, cold Stockholm, so you don't want to see that.
Rusty, Nick, have you met Peter before, or just?
I don't think I have. But
Okay.
Sure, I have, because you were drunk when you introduced me to him.
Oh, that's true. We were at the Coaching Awards, weren't we?
Yeah.
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Well, I remember, but you don't.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That was a busy night. It was a busy night, Nick. So, Rusty, this is Peter Matson, who I had the privilege of working for. So, Peter, just before you came on, I'll embarrass you. Just before we came on, we were talking about leadership, and I was talking about how in my career I think I've been led well about 4 or 5 times in my career, and definitely the time I spent working for you, 5 years, trying to, I guess, enhance, improve, modernize the talent system in English golf was definitely some of the best times. And actually a lot of that was from the point of view of you just going, right, get on, make it happen, and giving me the space to do it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I do think that is one of the both challenges and I guess tricks of leadership, giving people the space to allow them to actually do what they're good at and not getting in their way.
With unnecessary procedures, with all the stuff we call management.
You can say that again. Yes.
Definitely. So anyway, we've just been sort of sharing some of our thoughts and reflections over the year and this, that and the other. And I just wondered whether, 2018, for a fairly busy year, I guess, for you. I know you've got various things you're planning and working on, but any big reflections or takeaways?
Yeah, well, I thought about that question because I knew you'd be asking it. And I think where I am now compared to, I guess, where I was when you and I worked together, I've gone from, in a way, coaching individuals or teams of individuals to trying to coach organizations, which is an interesting move. And I obviously today work for the Swedish Sports Confederation. I manage a number of people internally in 3 departments, but all in all those departments are there for one reason, and that reason is to support other organizations, our member organizations, the sport federations, and the support is there to both support them to grow their sport, develop their grassroots, anything from sort of sport for kids to sport for everyone, pretty much, and also to help them excel in terms of whether it's Olympic medals or Paralympic medals or World Championships. And I think there's certainly some similarities when it comes to coaching, whether it's individuals or organizations, but there's also some differences. And what you just said, I think is one of them, sort of not being kind of tempted to be too complicated. I think a lot of what we try to do is based around sort of having those organizations work on their development plans, their high performance plans and so forth. And it's quite often easy to be sort of very ambitious in those plans. So you want to put everything in a plan. You've sort of got these great questions, and all of those questions just have to go into the template that the organization is to work with. And some of that will be really good, and some of it will be just sort of too much. And I think that's an interesting balance to try and strike.
So not like we've just been talking about planning, funnily enough, and not overly constraining through, and then reducing the opportunity for people to have those kind of moments of epiphany where they go, actually, you know what we've discovered, that actually what we had planned isn't quite what we thought, and actually we've got to move in a new direction. Because the danger is that you end up with people sticking on the course when actually everything's telling them that they should change course.
And I think that probably goes for organizations as well as individuals. I've seen that with individuals on the golf course as well, that here's my plan, here's what I need to do, and I'm sticking to it sort of until doomsday, but I'm not paying enough attention to where that plan is actually taking me. Am I improving? Am I constantly getting better? And that question should be asked sort of no matter if you're an individual or an organization trying to improve.
And the skill, I think, here in terms of planning for me is being intuitive enough to understand when the deviation needs to take place and what that might need to look like. And you have to be very, I guess, skillful and aware, hyper aware of what's happening in your space in order to be able to make informed decisions about what next course of action might be required.
And you need to be quite innovative, I think. You need to be sort of open-minded enough to dare to try new things, and at the same time not being able to or willing to stick to something that sort of hasn't yet shown any signs of sort of effect on what you're trying to accomplish. So it's a delicate balance, I think, to strike between sort of trying new things and sticking to what you're actually trying.
Yeah. Any reflections on that, guys?
I remember asking a question to a World Championship canoer who was, I said, how do you reflect on training? And she said, how close do we stick to the plan? What do the best canoers in the world do? And she said, they adapt. I would be clearly you would want, in all sports, you would want skillful, adaptable players. You would definitely want skillful, adaptable coaches. And despite your evidence, Stuart, you would want skillful, adaptable leaders.
No,
why don't we spend a lot more time developing adaptable learners and performers, or adaptable learners that can become adaptable performers? Why is that not up there high on the agenda within coaching?
Because it's hard.
Dan Abrams, welcome.
Hi guys.
I thought I'd best introduce you before you chip in. Go on, because it's hard. So tell us more.
Dan, I'm loving the Christmas homeless man look. It's a strong one.
This is my everyday look.
I love it.
This is why my working from home look. So when you saw me on Skype the other week, Nick, I'd had my makeup on, I had my hair booth on. Whereas this is. Yeah, this isn't so good. Oh wow! Sort of a baptism of fire. I've stepped into some really challenging questions here. Thanks so much, guys. Why is it hard? Because I think mental flexibility is one of the toughest things. I mean, it's a real higher cognitive function, isn't it? To have the capacity. I mean, just caught the tail end of Peter there talking from a golfing perspective, and working with a number of clients who are operating out on, say, the European or the US tour. It's having the capacity to step back, having a plan, and having the capacity to step back and ask yourself, okay, is what I'm doing effective here? It is tough because, how long do you keep doing it? It's almost an impossible thing to answer. Again, I'm just coming from a golf perspective. Is do you keep going? Do you keep going? Do you keep going? I always hear this quote: the definition of madness is doing something time and again and expecting a different result. But sometimes you've got to keep doing the same things to keep improving and to keep going to where you want to go. Whereas obviously there's other times where you've got to say stop. I think for me, as I was listening to Peter, again, I just jumped on the line here, but as Peter was talking, I was just thinking about communication, the importance of communication. So from an individual sport perspective, that's the communication between the player, his or her caddy, and myself as sports psych or with the coach, and my communication with that player's coach. From an organisation perspective, it's inter and intra-departmental conversations. It's conversations with your players. As from a coaching perspective, let's go straight into the player-led stuff. It's having a conversation with the player. What do you think? How do you think this is going? Do you think this is going to eventually help you get to where you want to go before making any judgment on that? Pivoting is a bold move, and it's that mental flexibility is tough. It's really difficult.
But do you not think, though, that I think it's tough if you've already set out that there's a clear goal and method and approach and everything else at the start. If you leave space, I tried to convince people in the production of plans, strategies. I mean, like national policy documents almost, to say, we deliberately need to keep space in here because we know where we want to get to and we know what a desired end state might look like, or we have an idea of that. And the reason for that is because people have said this would be a great desired end state. And we know also some things we might need to embark on in order to start on that journey. And that they're also things that we might want to do. They're approaches that we might want to take, key areas of focus. What we don't know and what we're not going to pretend to know is everything about the how of that, everything about how we might achieve that, because we deliberately want to try and keep that space open to give us the opportunity to be exploratory and have some discoveries. And part of the reason for that is it's arrogant to think that we know. I mean, we know something, but we don't know it all. So I have written national policy documents with great big hole in the middle, and it was very, very difficult to get leaders to go with that. Their view was, this is light on detail. Why aren't you telling us how you're going to do it? How don't you know? Why don't you know what you're going to do? And my argument was, well, firstly, we don't have enough information. Secondly, I don't know we ever will. So what we need to do is to be flexible enough to learn as we go. Learn, continuously measure, track, monitor progress, feel how we're going, and then we can then make judgments as we move, like this iterative learning approach. Before anybody else just jumps in on this, welcome to David Hinchliffe, who is rocking the Christmas hobo beard. Thank you, David. You're looking fabulous over there. I like the way you've done that.
Oh, I can make it better. Hang on. I can make it better.
Oh yes, there you go. The Santa hat is with it as well. That's awesome.
Now we're ready.
And Phil Carney, how are you?
Very good. Now, how are you all doing?
Excellent. Nice to see you both in your car like I am, whereas everybody else happens to be. Rusty's basically on his chaise longue, chilled out. Nick is
lovely.
in his what I assume to be his home office. Dan we're working from home, and Peter is, I guess, probably waiting for a flight. Knowing you, Peter.
Out shopping.
Out shopping. What
a
yes.
nightmare, isn't it? It's Friday dinner waiting to make it to the dinner table. Just need to pick it up from the shop first.
Well, you're all welcome to my little Christmas party. And David's won the prize for the most Christmassy attire. So well played, David. You've probably just come in on the end of us talking about, we're actually talking a little bit about leadership planning. We're talking about, even just learning spaces and creating and designing learning spaces, and why there's so many leaders and so many organizations who seem to feel that really structured and prescriptive plans are a means by which to achieve our goals. And we feel something different, and we're just interested to just reflect on that. But before we delve further into that, I'm going to ask each of you, because Dan's just arrived, David and Phil have just arrived. We've been talking about our annual reflections. So Dan, seeing as you were here first, any moments of clarity that you've had this year, or any areas of reflection that you think are worthy of sharing?
I don't know if they're worthy of having a massive conversation about them. I wouldn't be so bold as to say that, but I suppose a few things this year. I think obviously I'm a sports psychologist, so I'm going to come very much from the sports psych perspective, but I think three things for me this year. I think number one, it's easier to normalize mental skills in an environment by helping that environment accept vulnerability. That's become much more, I would never have said that 5 or 6 years ago, but my understanding of human functioning within sporting environments is it's vital to accept vulnerability as an everyday thing on and off the pitch and the court and the course. I think that volume of that noise has been turned up for me dramatically, having worked at various levels. Number two, if you want me to go on, I would say servant leadership, the importance of that as an optimal style of leadership.
How do you describe servant leadership? What is your understanding of it?
Well, I'm extraordinarily biased because at the moment I'm trying to semantically, linguistically frame that with reference to my psychosocial model, because I'm a shameless marketeer. However, I would say, just from a very basic perspective, being being player led. I know that sounds really cheesy to say, but I just experiences I'm having, just had over the summer, I'm having now at the elite level, just the importance of asking the questions, empowering players to find solutions. And I know is well trodden, but I just think we can all get so much better at doing that, because we're at times so keen to jump on I know the answer, I know the solutions. So I think that's just a big one for me personally. And I'll give you a final one very, very quickly, and it will not necessarily be particularly in keeping with the talent equation, but players absolutely, certainly at the elite level, players need to have a structure to their mindset. I'm sorry, I absolutely vehemently believe that players at the very elite level, at least at the very elite level, for them to optimize their ability to high perform more consistently under pressure, absolutely need to have a structure. And when they don't, they will not be the best that they can be. And I'm talking about elite level. So obviously that's where I mostly function. So that's me. That's my feedback for the year.
Epiphanies. So when you say a structure,
yeah.
I assume what you mean by that is that there is some kind of, I guess, mental framework or architecture within which the individual operates, or something along those lines. Is that what you're thinking?
I kind of lost you there, Stu, but when you said framework, absolutely. So I think it's really, really important. And again, this is part of normalizing any coaching culture. Just giving players a bit of a framework, and then helping them fit their own personality characteristics and specific mental skills needs into that framework. So they need a skeleton. And then helping them as individuals find the best way for them to get the most from that framework. But hey, look, as I say, I'm a sports psychologist, so I'm deep in that stuff. You know, as a coach, that's very relevant to you, but perhaps it's more surface level stuff for you guys as coaches. Maybe, I don't know. I don't want to say the wrong thing here, but I'm really deep in, the sports psych world. So my job is to help players have a structure to their mindset. And the more I work at the elite level, the more I believe that that's vital. So having that framework, as you allude to.
Yeah, and I think it's important for me the reason I distinguish between those things is because I think it's important to talk about kind of a framework or an architecture, more so than, say, a structure, because a structure evokes the idea of procedural, it evokes the idea of inflexibility, whereas with something like a framework or a scaffold or something along those lines, there's still scope for that to evolve, emerge, and there's still opportunities within a framework for various things to take shape. So that was just what my little just thoughts around that idea. But I wouldn't. That's a separate podcast that we can jump on another time, Dan. I'd be interested to explore that with you.
Fair enough.
David, what's been going on in your world, and what are your kind of key reflections on the year?
Before I say that, just to say about the idea of the framework and the structure. What I always think of that analogy that you told me. I'm not sure who you got it from, but about the opening and the closing of the gates.
Yeah.
And if you've got gates, then you've got space to run around, in the fields between the gates. But if you build too much structure around it, all you've got is just straight lines for people to go in. And they can't, they're too restricted. Yeah, so it's a certain amount of restriction, but not so much that you can't do anything except the one thing that is prescribed.
And then you can choose how many of those gates should be open, how many of those gates should be closed in the different fields. The fields of affordances, I call that, which I got from Keith Davids at Phil and Ed and Ollie's conference. The fields of affordances, open and close the gates. And then you can you can have more possibilities for action open and less possibilities for action open. Did a session like that with Southampton Academy recently, where we closed a lot of the gates, I think they were quite surprised that I'd closed so many of the gates off. But we were working in a particular space, and that was the nature of the work. Anyway, sorry, go on. Yeah, I interrupted you.
I think the big thing for me this year has been how I've moved away from sort of raw data, if you like, raw numbers, and analysing numbers. And I'm big on that, and I still do quite a lot of that. But one of the things I've realised is you can't, just because you can't measure it doesn't mean it's worthless. So you need to make sure that when you certainly, I'm saying you as if it's everybody, certainly in my experience, there's a lot of things that you can get done without necessarily having to measure them. And sometimes doing those measurements detracts from what you're trying to do. So you can, if you can change a behavior, for example, that's not necessarily something you're gonna measure with a statistic, but it is something that you can see, you can get a statistic out of it at the end of it. So, it might mean, in my world, it's more runs or more wickets or more wins, but sometimes it's less about, can we put a number on this, and more about, how does this feel, and how is this working? How does this, what do you think about this, rather than, what do the numbers say?
Okay, so you've kind of made a deliberate move to be kind of less of a slave to the numbers. Is that fair, or am I over egging that pudding a bit?
Just use them as a tool, with a limit to its application. It's not a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. And this is a person who did a 42-page statistical analysis of my club's performance last season. So it's not like I've thrown the numbers away. But a lot of the time, but when I get to the conclusion, I say, I end up saying, well, here's the thing that I think has happened. Here's some numbers behind it, but actually you can't measure this. So, we'll never know. You'll never know. The one that springs to mind is the batting collapse, right? Which is a classic thing that happens in cricket. You lose one wicket and suddenly you lose 4 wickets, and it's, why does that happen? Why does that happen? And you can analyze the numbers as much as you want, but at the end of it all, the psychology behind it is not something that's easy to measure. So you have to sort of think to yourself, okay, well, I came up with all kinds of statistical ways to try and analyze the collapses we had last year. And the conclusion I came to was sometimes it happens and you can't really measure why it happens. And then you have to come up with solutions to deal with it that aren't based on numbers.
Did you notice even any correlational patterns though?
Yeah, there were some things. I came up with some ways of trying to measure it, because I haven't got access to the vast amounts of data that happens in professional cricket, for example. I had to sort of guess at what some things are. So I tried to make a guess of the quality of the pitch, for example, or the quality of the opposition bowling, or the quality of the opposition fielding. I had to make some guesses around that and put some numbers on that. And there were some things that I noticed, like, for example, in games that there were batting collapses, the number of wickets per defensive shot played, for example, was much higher. So does that mean that the pitch wasn't very good? Because, normally a defensive shot is more reliable than an attacking shot. You're less likely to get out, but you're also less likely to score. So, does that say that it was a bad pitch? What was the percentage of catches to the percentage of drops, as a way of trying to say, this is how good the opposition's fielders were on that day. In one game, for example, they didn't drop a catch. They took 5 catches and they were all in the slips, and they didn't drop one. And we were bowled out for 97. Now, correlation is not cause, of course, but that's got to help, hasn't it? If you don't drop a catch, if 5 catches go to hand and you catch them all, that's going to help you. So,
because the law of averages would suggest at least one of those went down and somebody's given a reprieve.
Well, certainly in the league we play in, 70% is probably about right. Any more than 70% is about right. You never see over 80%, hardly ever. So for 100%, for 5 out of 5 being caught, that's very rare. But obviously it happens. So, there's a good example of almost sort of overly trying to put numbers on things, when actually you might look at it from a more psychological perspective and say, well, what was going through the batsman's mind when he walked out when 3 wickets had fallen really quickly? What was he thinking? And you can ask him, but you never really know. So
It's the old adage, isn't it? You know, not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted.
Your batsman needs a structure.
A mental structure.
Yep.
A mental framework, Dan.
Well, yeah, I've actually, funnily enough, I've just looked up structure as a verb. It's to give a pattern or an organisation to.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Well, we can live with it then. What was I going to say? I was just about to ask you actually. What? So there's a book here, Dan. So we've had Golf Tough and Soccer Tough, Cricket Tough. Surely has got to come out. What does the psychologist literature, or what does the psychologist community think about? Is there been anything written about batting collapses? Because they are quite an interesting psychological phenomenon on both sides, on the fielding side and the bowlers, and the kind of what's going through their minds and the flow and you know, kind of the ball hitting the right space and over and over and over again, and just everything that seems to happen goes right, you know, all those sorts of things, versus the batsman kind of coming out, and the level of fear and all the different things happening, their level of preparation, all these sorts of different things. What's going on, do you reckon?
This sounds like a massive cop-out, but you've really summed it up yourself. You know, the perception of a player, no matter their sport, is going to be shifting depending on what's going on the pitch or the court or the course. And so, you know, when that batsman comes out and walks onto the cricket pitch, and I must say I haven't really worked much in cricket, but what the batsman is thinking there, as David said, is going to make a difference, and how that batsman is feeling is going to make a difference to how they function physically out there on the crease. And if that batsman perceives that suddenly the importance of his or her innings has increased massively, then they can have a stress response. And when they have that stress response, you know, their working memory shuts down. They don't necessarily execute their technique with positive intent. You know, they're distracted. They might be over aroused. I'm throwing in lots of psychological terms there. And so, but subsequently it leads to decrement of performance. So for me, it just
you can understand that. You can understand that because one mistake in batting, cricket batting is notorious for one of the most psychologically difficult things you can do in sport, and hence why cricket has the most number of suicides than any sport by some margin. That's a true statistic. That's not a joke. But you can understand why somebody might feel anxious walking out to bat, in that, you know, one mistake and that's it. That's the end of your game. So it is very tough.
Yeah, tremendously so. You have to, in my opinion, you have to have the capacity to manage your attention, to manage your levels of arousal, your intensity level, if you like, and to be confident that you can execute with intent, in my opinion. And I think you have to have strategies around that. I think that walk to the crease is a really interesting one, because I think that's such a make or break time. It's almost like that walk from the halfway line to the penalty spot, you know, when England players are taking penalties, or any player taking a penalty. And I think that's an interesting conversation that cricket coaches can have with their players, is during that time, how are you managing yourself? What are you focusing on? How are you dealing with it? And that comes back, Stu, to my old notion of a game face and embodied cognition, and utilizing your body to be able to focus your attention and manage your heart rate, and to positively rehearse things that you want to do when you get up to the crease. I think, like all of these things, last thing to say here is that there's a difference between simple and easy. It's so simple to talk about, you know, but it's challenging to do. But I come back to, what is the plan? What's the strategy? If you ask your batsman, you know, what actually are you trying to achieve mentally? What specifically, what specifically are you trying to achieve mentally, irrespective of what's going on in the match, irrespective of what the state of the match is? I'd like players to be able to articulate within 30 seconds precisely what they're going to do, precisely what their strategies are, precisely how they can go about their job optimally in that moment. That's just my opinion.
This is funny. It's funny, David, because it's something I've thought about a lot. I've worked in, I've been all my life I've played, and and more recently been coaching cricket. But I've also worked and played an awful lot of golf, and I do think there's some very interesting parallels in the sports. Not least of which, it's the nature of the game itself. So in a game of golf, Kendall McQuaid talks about golfers operating somewhere between hope and fear, and I think he's absolutely right in the sense that very often, one at the very highest levels anyway, kind of one bad shot is the difference between food on the table and not, in the most extreme cases, or paying your mortgage or not, or whatever at the very elite levels.
That's what Desmond Haynes, West Indian batsman, used to call. If he'd had a run of bad form, he used to say, "I need to get myself a mortgage 100." So he would go out and score 100 just to make sure he could pay the mortgage.
So, but you see, in those sports are very, I think, have that, and they're very rich in that sort of stuff. But one of the things I've always thought about is why there isn't more prevalence of. I always find it fascinating, right, when like people are going into bat. So for me, for example, right, I open the batting, right, and even now, right, I won't consider going out to open the batting unless I've got my thin bat or a stump, and I've had somebody throw balls at me, and for me to feel the ball hit the middle of either a stump or a thin bat. Because in my mind, I just feel like I need to get into some form of readiness that is going to at least somehow equate to that moment. Now, one of the reasons I do this is because I'm ridiculously selfish when it comes to cricket. In fact, I'm very selfish when it comes to sport, full stop. But in cricket, right, I'm a batter, an opening batter. If I get out early, right, that's it. That's my day over. And all I've got to look forward to is to talk banter on with a load of dudes, which is quite good fun. But then stand in the field and do all these sorts of things. And it can be, that's an awful big time thief. So from a very, very young age, it was always, right, I'm going to get myself into a state where I'm going to have the best possible chance of being able to perform. And then when I go out there, I'm not getting out. There's no way I'm getting out. I don't care if we don't score any runs for a while. I'm not getting out. Simple as that. And I just don't see other young players, right, going out and doing that. What they do is they go out, play shots, get out, walk away with dragging their bat behind them, absolutely disconsolate that they'd got out. But I don't think they've ever given a second thought to how well they prepared for that innings, any kind of strategy at all about how they might construct their innings, and nobody coaches them that. So what's going on?
I think there's a few levels of things going on there. The first one is that your mentality of, right, I'm not getting out, is vanishing fast. The idea of someone sticking around is going quickly. The modern mentality, and that I can see this in 10-year-olds. I'm a dinosaur. The modern mentality is, look, I'm going to get out, I'm just going to try and smash as many as I can before I get out. And that's just increasing. That's increasing and increasing. There's 2020 cricket, and the new ECB competition is going to be even shorter. There's 10 over cricket happening now. It's even the new junior formats takes the focus off losing wickets, and puts the focus on scoring as quickly as you can. So it's all going that way. So that's the first layer of that. It's almost like, well, yes, here's my plan. My plan is to just smash as many as I can. But then the second thing is that, there is still a big tradition of we must coach children how to play in the technically correct way. And that's still a very strong tradition. And that, I think that's fading as well a bit, and certainly in the circles that I work in. But there's still this tradition of, if they've got a good technique, that's all that they need. And then maybe you can build a game plan on top of that, if they've worked out a good technique. But actually, it's the other way around, really. I think it's what you need is you need to decide how you're going to play, and that it's so dependent on context, because opening the batting in a test match is completely different from opening the batting in a 20 over match, let alone coming in with 3 balls to go in a match and you need eight to win. There's so many different contexts within that it's, you have to start with context, I think. And then you can start to build techniques around what you're trying to do, where you're trying to hit the ball, how often you need to hit the ball, and how much you need to stay in for. Because, as I say, in a 10 over game of cricket, you don't need to stay in for very long. So because it's unlikely your team are going to get bowled out. So if you are an opening batsman, maybe your job is to score as many as you can in the first 5 overs and then get off. So, context is everything, and then you can build a technique and a method around that, I think.
Well, which is a very important point that, I talk about a lot, which is, you've got to establish the context for the players to learn within, and then allow their techniques to emerge according to the context that we provide. So hence I'm a big believer that, young players I'm working with will have more opportunities to prepare and more opportunities to kind of be ready, because they'll have been exposed to a lot more what I would call cricketing problems, as opposed to having honed a technique in a non-realistic or non-representative environment. But I'm still going to come back, and I want to bring you back in here, Dan, as well, because I think it's a really interesting conversation about, this is just something I've seen across the board about this whole mental side. And, it's always seen as something else for someone else to do, and it's nebulous and all those sorts of things. And I think your point about a mental structure, I'm actually pretty aligned to, because it's almost, it's a bit like having, and I equate it to this. And this might be a very crude example that might not work, or an analogy that might not work, but it's the equivalent. You would never, most sports people wouldn't consider being, wouldn't consider getting involved in a game without having done some form of physical preparation. Now, it could be as light as something like a warm-up of some kind, or they've actually physically trained to make themselves strong enough and resilient enough to be able to perform the actions that they need to perform on the basis they know they're either going to get injured or whatever else. They'd never consider not having that kind of physical preparation. But we don't consider having the same level of mental preparation. We don't train, I know it's not a muscle, but the equivalent of our mental muscle. We don't, do we? We don't spend time training it. We don't spend time making it strong so that it's capable of withstanding different perturbations and challenges. We don't really think about it in that way, do we?
Do you do it yourself, Stuart?
Do I train my mental capacities?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think that we don't even consider. So counselling is seen as something that you just go to when you're broken and you're weak and you need fixing.
Yeah, when you need a problem fixing, yeah.
So, you just hope that your brain has survived for 40 years and everything works perfectly.
Well, I think
there's a load of crap in there as well that needs straightening out.
I think I do. And I think a reason I do is because I create a lot of, even in my own practice, let's say golf practice, right? I create a lot of golf games that have consequences, because I'm trying to equate my performance in practice to as much as possible to be as representative as to the game form. So, and by doing so, I create myself pressurized environments, which I believe are also training my golf brain. And that's partly because I read Dan's book about Golf Tough as well, which is this idea of kind of creating representatives. Yeah, there you go. There's your Christmas present, Dan.
It's in the post.
But you know what I mean? That point of training ourselves mentally, is that, you've worked in all sorts of spaces. You must see what it's like. Does it happen?
I don't know. Is that why you didn't have dinner last night? That was the consequence, wasn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm not having dinner.
Dan, what do you reckon?
I think, oh wow, where do I start here? So look, I think first and foremost you're spot on, Stuart, in as much as the one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful form of mental training, if that's what we're going to call it, is done on the court, on the course, on the pitch, as you're practicing. And the game design, a great game design will not just help players acquire skill, they'll help players acquire skill enveloped in mental skill. So I absolutely fundamentally agree with that. But let me just, and this is where I harp on about psychosocial driving the other areas. Let's just take, you said something brilliant about your cricket game. Okay. Yeah. You said that I feel, and I'm kind of paraphrasing you here, so please excuse me, but I feel most comfortable when I've used my thin bat with one stump, and I've kind of, whatever it is you said there, I have to do that to help myself feel most comfortable. So as a psychologist, I'm listening to that and I'm interpreting that as, wow, what a great clue that Stuart has given me there for that is an absolute necessity for his mental preparation to go out and compete to the best of his ability. And as David said, there's a context thing here. So if the context is a 20-20 and I've got to go and get as many runs, score as many runs as I can as quickly as possible, well, to be able to warm up mentally, I've got to get my thin bat out, have one stump, blah, 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 feel my way in. And as a psychologist, I'm thinking confidence. I'm thinking focus of attention, the ability to direct my focus of attention, feeling more comfortable, stretching myself there, being ready for being stretched out on the pitch, etc., etc. So what you're saying to me is a habit, okay, that is a physical habit or even a technical habit, if that's what you want to call it, that is enveloped in mental skills. So I think for me, a big part of it is helping coaches understand that I'm not going along and getting my watch out and saying, look at the watch and look into my eyes. That's not what sports psychology is. I know most people know that. I'm going to an extreme example there. But you can take the notion of physical actions and draw them down into mental preparation. You're mentally preparing there, Stu. So I think, just very briefly here, I think what it requires, Stuart, and what it requires, David, and what it requires, Nick, is much more of an acknowledgement, many more coaching conversations between coaches and players around what you've just said. Well, when you're at your best, when you have your best game, tell me about what you've done to prepare. You know, try to seek out little clues that you can then help players use as part of their structure or framework that they can repeat in the future, you know. And that's such an important question to ask, you know. What do you think other players do? What do you think the best batsmen in the world do? What little habits have they got? I think coaches have to more readily have conversations around that. And then I think that can act as a forerunner to help structure or add a framework into the player's mental preparation to go out and compete.
Dan, do you think that's done well enough in the talent development pathway in terms of helping people understand what frame of mind they need to be in order to perform their best? How do we help people learn that, and where and when is the right time for it? I know that was about 18 questions in one there. Sorry about
that. You know what? I think, look, I wouldn't be so bold as to say I know across every talent development pathway whether different governing bodies do this or not, but I think we can always get better at it, Nick. And I think one of the things I think, and coming away from that conversation I had at UK Coaching a few weeks ago, one of the things I wish I'd said is that I think that coaches should actually learn a psychological framework to help them be better at their question formulating, better at listening for the fine detail, better at interpretation of words, and better at helping players find solutions. It might be a framework like solution-focused brief therapy or rational emotive behavior therapy. That might sound like an extreme thing to say, and coaches might go, oh my God, I've got to learn another thing here, and that might sound quite mountainous to be able to learn. But for me, Nick, I think the answer lies in just helping coaches appreciate the language and the art of conversation more. to find solutions. And I think that frameworks introduced onto courses would go a long way to helping coaches be more appreciative of this side of things and better. And just understanding that sports psychology isn't just psychological skills training, mental skills training. It's patterns of language, and it's helping players uncover solutions. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I don't disagree. I think if we had coaches that understood Mostert and Ashworth's teaching spectrum and how to apply that, and then knew a little bit about Bloom's taxonomy of how to ask ranges of questions, and whilst there might be a lot of different questioning frameworks or kind of understanding of teaching styles, I think if everybody had a better understanding of that, I think coaches would be in a better place, especially when it needed them to answer that ridiculous "it depends" question, because they would actually be knowing what it depended on, and then they could apply something rather than just go "it depends" and not knowing any more than that. They would actually have some of the answers.
I also feel, Dan, that it's actually one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about contextualized learning and representative practice, because I think what you're almost getting more bang for your buck, because if you can make it representative enough and you can layer in certain elements of pressure, then or whatever it might be, whether it's pressure, consequence, reward, whichever way you want to go with it, what you can do is you can then begin to have some of those interesting questions in a practice environment, a relatively safe to fail environment. Whereas if you're working in a more isolated, structured, rigid, and more kind of technique focused space, then you can't really have those questions, because you're not really creating enough questions in the minds of the athlete around how performance might stand up in the theatre of competition. So I feel like that's one of the reasons I think that the methodology sort of goes hand in glove.
I completely agree. Last week when I was at a football club, this is an example from football, and the club is very, very good. The coaches are very good at using a representational learning design, and what I find as a sports psychologist, and I come in from a perspective where I'm not there as an expert on football at all. I'm not there to be an expert on football, but it enables me to have a deeper, richer conversation with a player, but because the context is game specific, match specific, it's aligned with the context of what he will experience on the pitch on match day at the weekend. The only thing you're missing is 50,000 people there, but that's okay. That can't be helped. But it enables you to ask those questions about, well, when that happened there and you reacted and responded in that way, what were you experiencing? Why did you react and respond in that way? What took you over there? Why did you speak to that person like that? Why was your behavior like that for the next 5 minutes? And also relating it to match day as well. So look, Stuart, I absolutely agree with you.
That's quite complex though, Dan, isn't it? Because there you're talking about having some really good observational skills, having a deep understanding of the game, being able to reflect in action, put together some really good questions, then listen to the feedback you're getting back to then ask and follow up with some other good questions. So there's a lot of really quite complex stuff that you're asking for that we should be able to do.
I think, obviously from my perspective, I don't have a deep understanding of the game. So I can continue to ask questions and probe and help the players to problem solve and troubleshoot their own game. And I wouldn't dream of actually advising. But yes, okay, my answer is yes. And I think as you're coaching, I'll borrow from Doug Lemov here, there is a skill to accruing as much behavioral data on the run as you possibly can as a coach. There is an element here, you're quite right, Nick, where you've got to forgive yourself as a coach. You can't see everything, you can't do everything. And there's obviously a time, do you have that conversation on the run? It's not always applicable to, do you have that conversation later? Or do you not have that conversation at all? And you set up a learning and design the next day that actually probes that for players themselves. So there's more of an implicit learning there. So I think you're right. It is complex. Coaches aren't going to get it right every single time, but it doesn't mean we don't strive to help coaches get better at that side of things.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think in coaching we've got a really good opportunity because if we try stuff, nobody dies, right? If we ask a question slightly badly or we pick up on the wrong trigger, it's not like you're trying to attach the aorta to the wrong ventricle. Like, there's no serious consequences of death if we get some stuff wrong, if we try it.
Nick, I would have killed so many people by now.
Wow.
I would have had a mountain of people dead if it was similar to heart surgery or something like that. Because most of my questions are horribly bad, and I'm after 15 years learning. I'm at the bottom of the rung, so I'm learning all the time.
Yeah, but you're not. You've gone through that curve of recognizing. We all get to a point where you realize we know nothing, or what we thought we knew was probably wrong. But it's how we accelerate the learning of the people that haven't got to that stage yet, that think they're right, is also, I think, part of our process.
Rusty, thoughts?
Yeah, I did a webinar type thing with the FA yesterday around this, and I'm going to try and be the anti-echo chamber.
You were very good yesterday, apparently, I heard.
It needs translating. You've already used lots of words that I don't understand. I'm being deliberately provocative to everyone, really. Coaches don't, there's just lots of long words from psychology. Often, it's in the form of academic papers as opposed to practical examples. Psychologists are very expensive. So, for example, at the RFU, the person who works in the pathway works 4 days a week. That's clearly, and in some clubs they have them 1 or 2 days a week. You don't fully understand context. You don't get enough opportunities to notice and, start to look at behaviours. I would start every single coaching course with something about the brain or noticing or behavioural or whatever it might be. However, no one is, not that I'm aware of. And so it's tough for coaches. I think, I would. Well, so my question would be to you, Dan. If you were, think of the environments you've been in. You've obviously been to lots of environments. If you were the head coach, and often, by the way, I don't see that many psychologists on the pitch experiencing a session like. If you were head coach, how would you have designed those environments differently? What would be your top 3 or 4 things you would have done differently across the environments you've seen, or the best ones you've seen? What were the top 3 or 4 bits?
Great question. And just the first thing you said there about language, I completely agree with you. And I think we in sports psychology need to be much better at that. And I've always said that. And that's why, without sounding like an arse here, that's why when you pick up my books, you read Game Face Controllers, Squashing Ants, as in Automatic Negative Thoughts, Match Script and things like that, because my big influence was a guy called Bob Rotella, who in the mid-90s wrote a book that kind of scaffolded the language down and made it much more accessible for players. And as a professional golfer, I used to listen to sports psychologists speak, and I used to think, well, I don't really understand what you're saying. So look, first thing to say is I completely agree with you. Wow, you've asked a big question, and I think it's challenging to answer. I think that what I come back to what I said at the beginning is that my job as a sports psychologist is to the environments I've worked in, and at the end of the day, Rusty, I work in predominantly an elite environment where there is money to pay for me and to have enough time with me. So at the very elite, there's not enough teams. I'm sorry, I come back to structure. I come back to framework. I've worked in a specific environment that has been quite close to you, where there wasn't a structure to the mindset of the players, and so they collapse under pressure. In my opinion, I've seen it time and again in football. Players cannot articulate what they're trying to achieve mentally going onto the pitch. Now, what I'm not asking for is the players to say to me, well, Dan, I'm trying to get in my individual zone of optimal functioning, and when I hit the right-hand column of my inverted U hypothesis, then of course I'm going to be in big trouble, and my anticipation and awareness and my functioning is going to be dead, etc. It's not what I'm after. But what I am after is, I'm passionate about, and I think the future is players able to go, I want to achieve this, this and this, and this is what we're and it's in conjunction with the coach, Rusty. It's in conjunction with the coach, and the coach can speak that language. So I can only speak about my stuff, my colloquialisms. I want every single player to absolutely know their game face, that is going to envelope the way that they execute their skills, that's going to envelope the tactics that they've got to execute. And I can give you all the science behind that, the embodied cognition, the self-efficacy theory, but we don't even need to know that. But what I damn well want is you as a coach to reinforce the game face. And I want your teammate to reinforce that game face. Not enough players have conversations amongst themselves about mindset. So if I take a football example, I want the right winger or the left winger or the fullback to have a conversation with the striker and say, you know what, Dan, when you're doing this, this and this, that really helps me. That really helps me mentally. I drop off, I self-sabotage when this happens. When the opposition is all over me, I need you to come to me and tell me, come on, speak to yourself confidently. Come on, good body language. So look, I'm kind of thinking on the run here. So I would say, again, I'm very sorry, but I want a framework for each individual's mindset. And that's an individual mindset, but I want a framework there, because I want to know when that player goes onto the pitch, they are able to self-manage. At the elite level, you can't self-manage. You're going to lose us the World Cup. You are going to lose us the World Cup. Number two, I want every single player to be able to, we've got to accept vulnerability. And I want every single player to understand that and know that and be tolerant of that, and not to dig other players out, but to help each other and form a common language amongst themselves, to be able to help each other. And then third, it comes back to all the stuff that you do at the Magic Academy and that Stuart talks about and Nick talks about, is the representational learning design and great creative practices where you can still envelope that in mental skills. So although players, the experiences they have in those practices, they get better mentally, I want more. I'm greedy here, right? I want coaches also to have a language around mindset that envelopes those practices as well. So those will be my three things.
Dan, I just recorded a podcast with Sarah Kelleher, who's the under 18 girls coach for hockey. Fletch is working with her or has been to observe some of her sessions. Have you seen her in action, Rusty?
I've seen her in action. I've seen her coach. I've seen her do some stuff with business. She's pretty good. Yeah.
And anyway, you'll be interested in the conversation because she talks about a motivational climate, and she is a coach who you might not necessarily agree with where some of her insight has come from and where some of her training has come from. But what she is talking about is very much the idea of, if we can foster an environment, and she talks about flourishing. So she has a flourishing model, and she talks about how she can foster an environment with a group of young people who've got various challenges going on in their world, where these ideas emerge. And it's really fascinating, and I'd be really interested to sort of get your reflections after you've heard that episode, because I think it's very much about what you guys have talked about, not necessarily using the same kinds of language, but it is the same ideas, though, the same ideas of how can we foster an environment that is, and it's quite how sometimes these things work against each other. That is creative, and yet challenging, safe, and yet uncomfortable, and and she, things like, how do we develop grit, yet in the same breath, allow for empathy. So it's a really dynamic environment that she talks about. It's really interesting.
I think one of the points that Rusty made was a really important one. Was the best psychs that I've ever worked with in my coaching career. I dragged them out on the pitch with me, and they were stood next to me. So they did some stuff with me to help me get better, and they did some stuff with the kids on the pitch to help them get better. I don't want them just in the classroom doing, a classroom session on goal setting or imagery. I want them on the pitch, bringing it to life in context. And they're absolutely the ones I think that that can make a difference. And for Dan's world as that particular ology, I think the more of those people that are doing that in situ, in context, then I think people get a much better understanding of the difference it can make to people.
On the leather sofa on the pitch, though, yeah.
Oh, of course, you have to wheel the couch out. Otherwise, it's not proper fixing people.
I mean, even the name psychologist would give people fear. I mean, however, it's the same with analysts. So if we called everyone a coach and it was just normalised that people were on the pitch and they were, they moved around and there wasn't this hierarchy, then they would, I think it would lead to better outcomes for players.
Yeah, I think part of that's the challenge that, of the label that we've attached to what we think a psychologist is from history. I think those people that work very hard to train and become psychologists, I think that do it in a way that we think it should probably be done. I don't think we should get hung up on the title, but ultimately I agree with you. They're just a coach. And I've just had a conversation with somebody else a second ago now that, my other half as a psychologist, I tell her she's just a coach. She's just a coach of the bit between the ears, right? And the sports scientist, coach of the body bit. So, sorry, Rusty, go on.
I said when she's telling you about all her qualifications, you're saying, yeah, but you're just a coach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I'm going to have to make my own dinner that night.
Right, guys, look, I'd love to carry on. I'm conscious of everybody's time, not least of which mine, because I'm in a motorway services and I've got to head up to see my brother because it's his birthday. But I really appreciate you coming to join me for my Christmas party. Hey, woohoo, what a way to rock a Christmas party, hey. But I've enjoyed the conversation. I didn't know where it was going to go, but I've enjoyed getting your reflections and I've enjoyed having the conversation that we've had. I wish you all the best for whatever the new year brings you. And hopefully we can reconnect at some point during that year and continue to share as we all learn.
Rusty, if you speak to Fletch, it's a month now. He said he was meant to call me and he still hasn't.
Oh, my God.
So, yeah, 29th of October. But, I guess there's a big satellite delay up to the north. I get that.
Well, while we're calling each other out, Livette, Lucy says you owe her a response to one of her earlier emails.
I've heard that, but I'm still trying to track down what to. So I don't know if she's left me a voicemail. That's just pointless because I don't listen to voicemails.
Oh, there you go. That's probably.
And my voicemail says, "Don't leave me a voicemail because I won't listen to this."
Why have a voicemail that says "Don't leave me a voicemail"?
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Right, guys. I appreciate your time and have a great one. And see you on the other side.
See ya.
Cool.
Bye.
Adios.